Hi there, welcome back to the 2013 film blog and episode 7, in which we're now going to discuss Zero Dark 30, the new film from Kathryn Bigelow, much talked about, much lauded and much criticised. Let's see if it's all it's cracked up to be. So, the important thing to say about a film like this, you can't really have failed to have noticed the attention that it's garnering. Whether that be for the Oscar nominations it's getting, because obviously it's up for Best Film, Best Actress, Best Director, I believe, as well as up there as well. It's up for quite a few big categories. But it's also come under pretty heavy fire from certain sections of the media for accusations that it glorifies the use of torture. So we'll get back onto that in a bit, but I think what's important to do with a film like this is to separate it into two things. One thing will be, how does it work as a piece of art? Second thing will be, what's the implications of what it's saying politically? Because I think those two are very different things. I think you can have a very good film politically, but a bad film artistically, and vice versa. Alternatively, you could have a film that is excellent both artistically and politically. If you look, for example, at something like last year's Nostalgia for the Light, that was sublime artistically and incredibly moving politically. So it is possible to traverse both those things. But I think it is important that we separate them from the beginning. So, what we'll do is we'll look then, first of all, at what is Zero Dark 30 as a piece of art. So, the story, as I'm sure anyone who hasn't been living in a cave in the mountains will know, it's the tale of the 10-year search for Osama bin Laden by the CIA. It starts with the terrorist attacks on Twin Towers in September 2001, and it ends with the death of bin Laden in Abbottabad in 2010. So it's spanning a period of 9 years, but realistically it is damn near 3 hours long. So you're basically talking about an hour every 3 years, which, however you want to talk about it, it is too long. But in a strange way, because the start of it is really interesting, and the end of it is really interesting. But there's just a bit towards the middle where it starts to sag a bit, thinking, do we really need to see all of this? So, film starts on a completely black screen, and all we hear is recordings of people in Twin Towers made after the first plane had hit, before the second plane had hit, but where the fires were starting, and they're clearly terrified, they think they're going to die, and you've got the emergency services trying their best to try and save them, say, you're not going to die, the fire service will get there, knowing full well chances are they won't. And we cut from this scene to, I think it's 2 years later, at a CIA black site, in which some CIA men in black balaclavas are standing around basically interrogating an Al-Qaeda suspect. And after they walk outside, one of the officers takes off balaclava and reveals herself to be not a man at all, but a woman, who's our main character called Maya. Now, she is a very interesting character study. Supposedly she's based on a real-life person. There's been an awful lot made of the fact that she is awfully similar to Claire Danes in Homeland. They are saying they are different people, but I think the similarity has to be put there, the fact that they're both women who look frail and weak, and yet are shown to have this inner core of iron that you need to do this kind of job. At one point, Maya is described as a killer, but not that kind of killer. So, what transpires over the course of the film is that we go from 2001 to, I think it must be later than 05 because they have the 7-hour bombings. They have sort of, I think it's towards the end of 09, 08, something like that, where the trail goes cold. And everyone thinks, chances are, Bin Laden is gone. Now, what makes this part of the film quite interesting is that when you look at the history of how this film was made, originally this film was being made and developed before Bin Laden was captured and killed. So the film was supposed to be going towards a conclusion in which the hunt goes on, almost showing like, and you can sort of see exactly where she was going to go with it. It was going to be a case of the American government doesn't care anymore, but Maya is still digging away to try and find something. But obviously, what ultimately happened is that they did find Bin Laden. And so Kathryn Bigelow has had to go through. And the first thought was to just recut some of the scenes. And they said, in the end, no, they couldn't do that. They had to remake the whole film. And you see, I think you can see pretty clearly where the split goes between the two sides. Ultimately, they find some evidence they overlooked. It gives them a new trail. And this is where it starts to sag a bit, because they find, basically, they locate Bin Laden's courier. And there's an extended sequence of probably a good half hour, 40 minutes, in which they're trying to track down this courier by using his GPS signal on his phone, and by hanging around a lot of town squares, waiting for when the signal gets strongest, because obviously he must be going around in circles or something like that, and they can find him. The problem is that we don't need this much detail in how the CIA found this guy, because we know how it ends. We know they have to find him. So it's really not that interesting for us as an audience to watch some bloke driving around 100 times while people try and shout things and try and find, where is the signal coming from. But ultimately they find the courier eventually, and they track him to a compound in Bottabad. And from all the intelligence they gather about this compound, it seems to be a very, very professional job in securing it. And this leads Maya to the uncompromising belief that this compound must contain Bin Laden. And she has to now convince her superiors at CIA to somehow that this is where Bin Laden is, we must invade, blow it up, whatever, to try and get hold of it. Eventually they agree, and we know they send in a bunch of Navy SEALs. Now, the last sort of hour of the film is taken up with the SEALs going into the compound and taking out Bin Laden. It's sort of like a cut-price version of The Raid, everyone saw that. Just working up levels of the compound, shooting out bad guys, blowing up doors and things. That's what they're trying to do, to ultimately get to the top level of the compound and kill off Bin Laden. Now, there are a couple of parts. This was the part of the film for me, apart from the bit with Korea, it didn't really work, because we are taught that basically these Navy SEALs are like water. They can go anywhere, in, out, they aren't seen. They crash a helicopter in Bin Laden's front garden. Now, I appreciate it is the middle of the night, I appreciate it's quite startling, but if you've got the head of Al-Qaeda living in your compound, and a Navy SEAL helicopter has just crashed in your front garden, you probably wouldn't just be hanging around. There would probably be some kind of escape route planned to get out of there. But it seems no one even notices this. Second point is they leave the garden gate unlocked, which is a bit strange. Thirdly, they start exploding doors. Still, no one notices they're there. And then, fourth of all, when they try and capture the terrorists, it's almost laughable, because one of the SEALs just goes, basically, he goes into the room and goes, "Psst, Osama!" And he comes out and gets shot. And you're thinking, is that really what happened? Because if it is, then the leader of Al-Qaeda is basically an idiot. And the problem is, these things make you laugh quite a bit. And really, this is supposed to be the scenes of real major suspense. And yet, all you're doing is you're laughing at them. I suppose overall, it's an interesting film. It certainly kept you interested. Jessica Chastain as Maya is very, very good. I don't think it really helped that they had a couple of extras from Spooks on there who you recognise and think, there they are. But, you know, we'll let it go. So, in terms of a piece of art, I'm not sure I agree with all the critics who are giving it the raving reviews and the 5 stars and the how amazingly brilliant is this. It's certainly an entertaining event, 3 hours. It is, unfortunately, far too long, and the last scenes I felt were unimpressive, but I know others have felt them were very, very dramatic. But, and there is a major but, we have to, unfortunately, reverse this now and have a look at the politics of the film. Now, obviously, what this is, it's an American-made film, so obviously it is going to ultimately be a piece of American propaganda to try and justify the war on terror. The problem is, you've got a duty in a film like this. When you're saying this film is totally based on real events, you've got a real duty to make sure that what you're portraying genuinely is what really happened. And this is the problem that we get with it, or one of the many, is that, okay, the first 2 scenes, the one in 9/11 and the one on a black site following it. Yes, okay, there's a splice in between that says 2 years later, but to all intents and purposes, what the film is saying is that this interrogation of a terror suspect that is brutal in the extreme, they're trying to say it's justified because of what happened on September the 11th. And this is the problem with the film, okay? It does not in any way glamorise torture. Torture is horrific, and no one is denying that in this film. Those who are suggesting this film is saying that torture is a good thing and it gets results, they're idiots. They clearly haven't watched the film properly. The fact is the result comes from, later on, actual paperwork. It does not come from torture. So those that are suggesting that the film is glamorising torture, they're wrong. What the film is guilty of on the torture front, it's not suitably condemning. And the problem is that when you come to torture, there are no shades of grey here. There are 2 viewpoints. You either view that torture is justified, or you view that torture is never justified. You don't really get people in between going, torture, oh, it's maybe okay for the situation. You've got to be on one side or the other. You either accept that torture is necessary, or you say it is deplorable, never be used. Because this film fails to come down on the latter of those 2 arguments, it fails to say that torture is evil and shouldn't be ever used. You have to get the impression that what it does is its viewpoint is that the torture scenes and the torture that we have no reason to believe did not actually happen was justified. And this is the problem we've got. It isn't glamorised. It isn't said it's a good thing. It's saying it's a justified thing. It is saying that this happened to our men in Twin Towers, therefore we did this. And that I've got a massive problem with. Because the problem for the entire film is the message of proportionality. Because politically and militarily, what the Americans, and indeed ourselves, have done since September the 11th, there's no proportion to it. The fact is that for every person that died in those Twin Towers, we've killed hundreds. And this is never mentioned. The only people that ever seem to die in this film are innocent civilians who were killed by these evil terrorists. The only time we see any terrorists dying is the ones who are shooting at the Americans. We see plenty of poor, innocent women and children being killed by terrorists, and yet the only time a woman is killed by the SEALs is when she first of all shoots at the Americans. This is my problem with the film, is that it's so heavily ingrained in that Western camp. The fact is that no one even mentions Iraq. No one even mentions barely Afghanistan. Certainly the mention of what they did there. There's no mention of the Americans. For example, at one point, they show the September bombings, and they assume that the bombings on 7th of July in London were all to do with this hunt for bin Laden. That's just not true. They weren't, they were maybe to do with that. What they were more to do with was Tony Blair following George Bush into Iraq and into Afghanistan. The fact was that if Britain hadn't done that, it's exceptionally unlikely these attacks would have happened in Britain. These were homegrown terrorists, they were not from Pakistan. The point is that you can't really compare 9/11 and 7/7 in that way and suggest they've both done the same thing. That does a massive disservice to both sets of casualties. But again, we're shown 7/7 is a justification for the torture of what comes next. The point is we're shown 4 major terrorist incidents. Each time it's being used as a justification for what's coming next. What we never seem to see in between is what the Americans have done and the British have done en masse. We never see the attacks we're performing and the atrocities in which we bombed weddings, we destroyed Red Cross centres by accident, we killed thousands of civilians. But this is never shown. There is never any attempt to justify why these terrorists are doing what they're doing. Yes, what they're doing is deplorable, but equally so is what the Americans are doing. And the way this film has been shot and started, it makes it seem like September 11th was a totally unprovoked attack on America. It's a sensitive subject, but that's simply not true. It was not wholly and totally unprovoked. There is a lot of history behind this that comes before that. But the way this film portrays it is that basically this whole war on terror started on that day when bin Laden mercilessly and needlessly, without provocation, attacked the Twin Towers. That isn't true. And we at no point see the military interventions. We get a few occasional references to the weapons of mass destruction being a lie. But again, that isn't really explained. Why on earth were we in Iraq? Because that seems to be now tied into this. And yet we know for a fact that Iraq had nothing at all to do with Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda were in Pakistan and in Afghanistan, they weren't in Iraq. Why were we there? And again, that's not explained. And is that some reason why these terrorists are attacking you? And this is the problem I've got with the entire film, is that politically this film is absolutely reprehensible. Because it tells such a rose-tinted, westernised view of what's happened in the last decade. There's no accountability for what we've done wrong. There's no reason given as to why these people are so desperate to kill us. And this is the problem with it, is ultimately what you're left with is a situation in which it's almost like they send one of our guys to the hospital, we send one of theirs to the morgue. It's the constant one-upmanship, but what you don't see is the in-between. So it seems almost disproportionate, because it seems like a few Arabs are tortured, they reply with a bomb. A few more are tortured, they blow up an airbase. It's infuriating that this is a view of history that is being allowed to be peddled. And I really hated it, and it really, really grated on me that this is what they seem to believe is an accurate version of history, because at the start it says all this is true. Yeah, okay, the facts you've given are true, but What about all the other true things that you've missed out in between? And I'll be honest with you, I really, really hope this film does not win the Oscar for anything. I really, really, really hope so. And it's annoying because the film, as a film, is quite interesting. And yet, politically, it is horrible. It's a vile, vile piece of propaganda that we're now being expected to just eat down and accept that the Americans in all this were a totally innocent, injured party. They did nothing wrong. I'm sorry, that is not right. That is absolutely wrong. Okay, there is no excuse for terrorist actions, but you know what? There's also no excuse for invading somebody else's country. So you know what? I hope it fails, and I hated the film. Hated, 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 hated it. Good night.